Hello, welcome to this video tutorial. I'm going to teach you how to build a custom MVC, of course the OOP version, right? In order to organize ourselves, we need to create a few folders in our project, which contains different files or sub-directories, right? The two main directory that I need to create, one is going to be an app folder, and the next one is going to be a public folder, right? Public folder is what is going to serve or receive the request and replies back to the customer. So public is like a public folder on any web hosting, and that way we restrict the access to the app folder, which contains most of the file we need, right? Now let's go ahead and create some other subfolders inside the app folder. So if we talk about MVC's model view controller, so I'm going to create those folders in order to organize myself. So I'll go ahead and create a one controller folder. Let me just expand this so we can see what it is in it. Then I will create another directory, call it view. And of course I will create another one called model. Okay. Now, beside these three folders, I have to create a little bit more folder as well. So the one I create here is going to be core, is a library folder which contains all the library, all the files that is shared across the project with different files that I create. And also I will create another folder called data. So in data folder is where I keep my data that I need to access, to manipulate. In this MVC model, instead of using database, I'm going to use file. But simply, if you work with a file, we can simply convert it to database as well. Okay, let's get to work. So the very first file I need to create is inside the public folder, and the file should be index.php. Now what I do is I want to send all the requests coming to the public folder to the index.php file. For that reason, I simply have to use a .htaccess file. But before doing that, let me go ahead and run the PHP built-in server. So I just cd to public, and I will go ahead and type php-uppercase s localhost, and I will go port 800, right? So now if I go ahead and open my browser, let me just go ahead and type localhost :800, I should be able to simply see a blank page since the index.php doesn't have much in it, right? So let me go ahead and put something here so we can see h1 homepage. Okay, so if I go back to the browser, refresh the page, I can see the home page. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to send every single request coming to the public folder to index.php. So the index.php works as a bootstrap, meaning it receives the request, does something those requests, prepare them, and actually execute certain codes to return back the response. So for that reason, I'm going to create a .htaccess file. So I'll call it .htaccess. With .htaccess, I can manipulate the Apache, certain things with Apache as well. But here what I want to do is I want to write some condition and being able to redirect or route all the requests to index.php. So let me just go ahead and copy the code that I have, and I can explain more in detail. So if you look at this code, I'm saying rewrite engine on. Then I'm adding some condition here. If it's file directory or symlink, I simply want to send that request to index.php. I want to append the query string. These are the, let's say, parameter list, like name equal x and ampersand last name equal y, and so on, is going to be appended to that one. L is the last condition applies, so it will not follow any other condition. So now that I did this, if I go ahead and save this file, go back to the browser. Okay, let me see just the browser. I can simply go ahead and say test, and simply, as you can see, it goes to the index.php again. Test best and id 1, and so on, right? So all the requests are passed to the index.php. So that is where I will read the query string. In this case, this is a query string, and I simply extract the information and start processing the request. So the way we want to deal with this is simply I want to go ahead and be able to say home. I want to go to, let's say, contact us page, right? Something like that. Or I want to go to about us section of the home. Or I want to go and say some other material, whatever it is, right? So that's how I will go and call this page. So rest of this tutorial shows you how you can get this request, expand the information, or explore the information, and respond with the request that you get. So the very first thing is, in order to make my life a bit easier, I'm going to create some constant variable that allows me to access different part of this application. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add some constant variable here. So in order to just make the video a bit shorter, I'm just going to copy this information and I will show you the information. So here I'm defining a parameter or name that is called root. I use a directory name or dir name, which actually return the parent directory of the current parameter. In this case, is directory. I use the directory separator because simply I want to be able to run this code on different platforms, Windows, Linux, and so on. And as you know, a // are different. That's why I'm using the directory separator. I'm defining a few constant variable here. As you can see, they're pointing to different directory. Like I have the app folder, directory, view directory, model directory, data directory, and core directory. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the root that I have defined before, and append the app and add the directory separator at the end. So for the view, I'm doing the same thing. So if you stop the video, pause the video for a second and look at these things, it's a very straightforward to actually access the information. Now, the other thing I want to introduce here is autoload. So whenever I want to use an object that I create of a class in PHP, I do not want to include this file myself. So I want to do autoload. So whenever I'm building a new object, it automatically will be loaded. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I will go ahead and use the include path that is part of PHP. Now that I'm looking as I actually forgot to add the controller here, so I'm going to do that right now. Right, so what I do is I add the controller. Now I want to go ahead and set the include path, meaning in PHP I can say these are the path that this application has access to. So whenever I define an object, it simply looks into the include path to see if it can find the related file or the class, so it can include it simply into the file. So I'm going to go ahead and simply we'll create an array. I'll call it modules. Okay, and I'll go ahead and I will add root, app, core, controller, and of course, finally, data, right? So I added all these modules. Now what I'm going to do is I simply go ahead and add the set include functionality. So I'll go set include path, right? Now what I do is I have to append the new values into the include path that is part of PHP ini. So I'll go ahead and I'll simply say get include path, which will return me the include path that is already defined in PHP ini, right? And then simply I'll go ahead here and I start appending. So I will use the path separator again in this case, so the one that allows me to separate the path that different value can be used in different OS. And I'll simply use the implode function, and I'm going to add the path separator as what I want to put this information together. Remember, these are array, so I want to put them together, but I want these elements to be separated by the path separator, so it can be simply added to the include path. And simply I'll go ahead and add the modules, right? So as I go with this, I should be okay for now. And let me just do a simple test here. So I'll go ahead and I do var dump, and I will say get include path. Let's go to our browser. If I can find the browser. Okay, and refresh this. So here you go. As you can see, my path contains the link to all the files that I have added, right? So now that I've done this, next what I have to do is I gotta call the autoloader function as well. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and copy this code from here. We'll go use SPL auto load register, which I would say is SQL auto load and simply false. So that way I'm saying start doing the autoloader automatically. Now that I've done this, I'm almost there. So what I have to do is when this information from the browser coming in. So let me show you this. Let me do something here. So I'll go ahead and do word dump and server, and simply I want to show you request URI. Request URI. That's what is going to be appended to the end of URL, like the slashes that we had, right? So if I do this right now and I refresh this, then you should be able to see that it's home. So I can go say index ID 10, name test, and so on. So you can see all these values that are coming into the application. So what I have to do now is I want to create a class that allows me to extract this information and call the proper methods or proper controller, proper class to actually respond to the request, right? So for that reason, I'll go to the core function and I will create a class. This class, I will call it application.php, right? Oh, sorry, I don't need PHP here. Here you go. So application.php. So the class is created. Okay. So what I have to do is, if I look at these URL right now, I consider the home to be the controller, index to be the action of that control or method in that controller, ID is the parameter name, 10 is the value of the ID, name is the parameter name, and test is the value of that parameter. So if I want to divide this, it's going to be one for home, second for the index, which is the method of that, and the rest are the parameter. So what I need in my class is I need to create 3 variables to actually hold those values for me, right? So I'll go ahead and add those. Protected, I'll call it controller. Okay, for now, protected action. That's a method that I have. Okay, and finally I have protected parameters or param, right, which is an array, right? So all the parameters will go into one function. So let's go ahead and create the constructor here, public function constructor. Now for the constructor, what I need is I need to be able to parse this information that are coming in. So if I go here and I just simply say echo $server request URI. So let me just show you this. So I have created the class, I have the constructor. So what I have to do here is I can simply go ahead and call the constructor. That's all I need to do for now. So I'll go ahead and say new application. Okay. So now if I go to the browser, refresh the page, I should be able to see the request URI, right? So in my class, in my application class, what I'm going to do is I will create a function to actually be able to parse the URL for me. So I'll go ahead and do that. So simply I'll go ahead and create a second function, protected function, parse URL, right? Now for the parse URL, what I have to do is I want to get the request URI, and if it's not empty, I want to simply explode it into meaningful information. So for that reason, what I'm going to do is I simply go ahead and create a variable here. I'll call it request, and I will say trim server request URL with slash. So I want to get the right of the backslash that is coming on the URL at the end of the URL. Now I will go ahead and I will say if request is not empty, right? So if request is not empty, okay, let's just go ahead and do this. If it's not empty, I just simply have to split the request into different parts, controller, action, and the parameter list, right? So for that reason, what I'm going to do is first I will create a variable to get the information. So I'll go ahead and explode the values with the backslash, with the slash, sorry, and I will go ahead and simply go ahead and do trim the request. Oh, actually, I don't know. I don't think I need this, but I'll just put it here. Request, right? I want to get the request, and that should be it, I believe. Right? Yeah, it should be it. For some reason, I do have the trim here again. I'm not sure why. Probably is because I didn't have the first line of the code first. But in case if you have any issue, we come back. So this should be the place that I have to look into. So now what I want to do is, now if I go ahead and run this, if I do and go war dump URL, right? If I do this, definitely I got to call the function here. So I'll go say this. Parse URL, right? So if I go ahead and let's see what we have in URL. Let me just go ahead to the browser, refresh this. So these are what we have in URL because I explode the information that I had in the URI. So it become home, index, ID 10, name, and test, right? So now it's very easy to work with. So what I need to do is, the very first thing is I need to get the controller. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add a variable, which is this controller, and I will check if the first parameter, which is 0, if you look at the URL here, the very first one was controller, right? So I'm saying if it is set, simply use the value, and I will put all the controller class that I have. I'll add the word controller at the end of the file name. So in case if it's home controller is like this, if it's index controller is going to be index controller, or whatever it is, I will add the word controller at the end of the class name or the file name as well, right? So here I'm saying if it's there, just get the very first parameter. In our case is what was it? It was home, right? And add the controller to it. So make the menu. So not make the menus. Make the controller name. Right, what I do is, for default, I will say if this is not there, if this is not set, simply use the home controller. As a matter of fact, I can go ahead and add this one here as well, right? So I can make a default home controller here. I'll just copy that. For the action, I can say, okay, the action name is always index. If it's not passed, and the parameter, I'll leave it empty, right? Now what happened here, since I have created a name of the controller, I should be able to create the action as well. So I do the same thing for the action. So as you remember, I have a parameter called action. Simply go on, and I say this action, if its parameter URL second element is set, use the second element. Otherwise, use the index name. Now that I have used both for the controller and I found the controller and the action name, I don't need those two array element. So I can simply go ahead and use the onset function and unset the URL 0 and URL 1. So I'm removing these two elements from the array. Whatever is left after that in the array URL are the parameters. So what I can do is I can simply go say this params equal, yes, URL, right? So what I can do here is I just have to check if the param contains value or not. So for that reason, I just simply go ahead and say empty. If it's not empty URL, if empty is URL contains some value, so simply go ahead and use the array values function, because I just need the function, I just need the value of that array, and I will go ahead and get the URL. Otherwise, I simply put an empty array, right? That's all we have to do for the controller for now. So now that I have created this function, so if I go here, I should be able to say this. Let me just echo them so we can see the value. Echo this controller, right? And if I go ahead and do a BR here, and then this action, right? So if I do these right now and I go back to my browser right here and refresh this, so I can see home controller is the name and index is there. Of course, if I go back here and I do, let me see if I can do this, print or this params, right? So if I go here, should be able to get the parameters as well, right? So as you can see, now I've accessed all the information. Everything should be okay at this point. Now what I have to do is I have to load the proper controller, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to fix the controller, create the controller first, so you can have an idea about the controller. Controller is a class, so a controller is a workflow, is an action that the user can take as a workflow that can take on calling some resources on your application. So for that reason, I'll go ahead and create a file or a class, I can say. I'll call it home controller, right? Now, if I go ahead and look at the home controller right now, as I said, the home controller will have few functions that can work with this. So the very first method of function is the public, is the default function, which is index. So I'll go ahead, public function, index, right? Now, what I'm going to do here is, I just go ahead and say echo I am an, let me just go ahead, class and method. Okay, that's okay. So what this one does is it just simply prints the class name and so on. So what I have to do here is I'll go back to the application. I have the controller, I have the action. So now is the time to call that controller, because the very first parameter that is in request URI is home, and simply call the home controller. So I'll go back to the application and start completing the rest. So what I have to do is I simply have to have I have to see if the file exists. So I simply go ahead and let me just copy this code so it's going to be less time on this video as well. So I'll go ahead and say if the file exists, and I'm using the controller constant that I have created in index.php. You remember this, right? So I'm using that one because it's not accessible. Remember, all this code are run in index.php. So when I say new application has actually access to the object that is created from application, has access to those constant. So I'll go ahead and say if this controller exists. Look at this. I'm saying controller, this controller. As you can see, the controller is already set there, .php. So meaning it will go to this folder, it looks for the home controller. If it does exist, it simply has to create an object of that controller. How does it do that? Okay, let me just close this. It just simply have to say this controller equal new this controller. As simple as that. So I'm creating an object of that class home controller already, right? Now that I have done this, I just should be able to see a value. Let me check this one. Okay, so now since I have the object, I simply go ahead and say this controller index, right? Remember, the controller is home controller, and the index is a method that I have created here. So now if I go and refresh my browser, simply it has to print the name of the class and the method that this code is, or this text is printing from. So if I go back here, refresh this, I can see I'm in home controller method, home controller index, right? So I can simply get that value in. Let's go back to our application and complete the rest. Now that I have got the controller, definitely I have to check if the method, which in this case is index, exists or not. If it does, then I can simply call the method and pass the parameter if I need to that function. So for that reason, I can simply go ahead and use the if method exists. Method exists, return the true if a function return exists on the class. So in this case, I will pass the class name first, then I will go pass the action. So remember, we have created the action before. So I'm saying if the class, this controller class, contains this action, whatever is the value, simply now is the time to call the method. So the way I can do it, I can go simply say call user function. This is one way of doing it. So in this case, I can pass multiple parameters if I need to, or I can simply use the function array, which I can pass all the parameters as an element to, or parameters to the method, right? So in this case, I'm going to say, okay, pass this on this controller, okay? On this controller, call this function, which is an action, right? So now that I have done this, we have to remember the very first two part is an array, the name of the class and the action, and the last part are the parameter as well. So I'll just simply go ahead and pass the params. So if you look at this right now, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I put the square bracket in the wrong place. No, okay, wrong square bracket. And then I should have just that one. Does this look good? Let me just check my code. If I run this right now, yes, it does. And without calling the action here, simply this function calls my method and pass the parameter, right? So now, of course, if I want to pass certain parameters to this method, I can simply go ahead and use optional parameter. Like for instance, I can say ID is equal nothing, name equal empty string, and so on. So in that case, if the parameter are passed through the params in order that they are added to the array will be passed to the parameter. So ID will be the first parameter of the array and name will be the second one. So I can access those in my function. Okay, let's see if everything works. I'll go back to the home controller. I'm going to create another function. I'll call it public function. Let's say about us, right? And simply I'll go ahead and copy this one here, and I'm in class blah, method blah, right? So now what will happen is if I go instead of index, I just simply go and say about us. This is what's gonna happen. Look at this. I'm still in the controller class, but the controller method is about us. So I can add as many as these methods I need based on the workflow that I have, and I have to complete my task. Up to here, I just show you to how to create index.php to run the whole application, how to create the folders, .htaccess, building application, core functionality, which allows you to split the URI into different parts and simply access those information if you need to, right? So I'll finish this video right here. In my next video, I'm going to do the view as how to create the view, so you get familiar with how to pass the information from your controller to the related view of a method. I hope you enjoyed this video. Watch my next video as well. Have a good day.